Julian Assange's extradition from the UK to the US was approved by UK Home Secretary Priti Patel. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese claims that he will not be pressured into publicly intervening in the case. This week, I spoke to academic Dr Kylie Moore Gilbert. Kylie, thank you so much for joining us. Assange's lawyers are going to challenge the order and have 14 days to lodge the appeal. What do you think the Albanese government should be doing?
I think they've made it pretty clear that they don't want to conduct so-called megaphone diplomacy, but I really hope that means they are conducting traditional diplomacy and robust diplomacy at that behind the scenes. There hasn't been much evidence of either the previous Labor government 10 years ago or the various iterations of the Liberal government under a couple of different Prime Ministers that we've had since then, that diplomacy has borne much fruit at all, or that the government has involved itself much at all. But I really hope, given Albanese's prior statements prior to being elected in support of resolving this issue of Julian Assange, that means that Penny Wong and Albanese himself are behind the scenes picking up the phone to very high-level associates in the US administration, and therefore, they are able to make clear their views on the matter.
So I guess if the shoe was on the other foot, would Australia then be happy if the US said to the UK, don't extradite our US citizen to Australia to face prosecution?
I think it really depends on what crime the person is accused of committing. And obviously, if this was a dangerous criminal or a terrorist or somebody like that, Australia would be outraged if the US tried to prevent us gaining access to that individual and putting them on trial. But I think the Julian Assange case is unique in a number of ways, and it's essentially a political case. It's not a matter of law and order or crime and punishment per se. Where you fall on the political spectrum and what your personal views are about WikiLeaks and its activities, particularly during the war on terror, determines what you think about this case. And I think that it really needs a political solution because it's not a standard matter of justice or law and order. I don't know the particulars of the US Department of Justice's probe into Assange's activities, but I do know that he's accused of espionage. And, as somebody who was also falsely accused of espionage, I find that quite startling. I think at the end of the day, there's an argument to be made that WikiLeaks was a publisher, a new form of publisher, perhaps a 21st century online publisher, but a publisher nonetheless. And when we start accusing publishers of espionage, in particular those located outside the boundaries of our own country, because obviously WikiLeaks wasn't operating out of the US, it wasn't publishing out of the US, it was based abroad, and therefore there are questions to be asked about the jurisdiction of US courts over the operations of WikiLeaks in the first place. It is a very slippery slope, and there are warning signs and dangers for any publisher operating in the US or outside of it should Assange be convicted of espionage for publishing material which is very arguably in the national interest.
Tell us about his treatment in Belmarsh prison. It's not a white-collar prison, and you were wrongfully incarcerated and survived 804 days in an Iranian prison. Can you describe to us the enormity of what it's like from a physical and emotional point of view?
One of the reasons I decided to start speaking out in favour of Assange was that I read up about the kinds of conditions that he is being subjected to in Belmarsh prison. And they really shocked me, and they really hit home for me. I mean, I had come from a despotic authoritarian regime, the Islamic Republic of Iran, and been subjected to extreme solitary confinement, psychological torture, sensory deprivation, and etc. And when I read about particularly the solitary confinement cells, which Julian Assange had been held in for quite a substantial period of time in Belmarsh prison, there were very strong echoes of what I went through in Iran, and that really disturbed me, given that this is the UK we're talking about. And, we obviously hold them to a much higher standard in terms of human rights and prisoner rights than we would a country like Iran. And at the end of the day, Assange isn't a danger to anyone. He hasn't committed a violent crime. He's not, going to expose a member of the British public to any danger. Therefore, I don't really understand the rationale behind holding him in a maximum security facility for prolonged periods in solitary confinement in the UK as you said, he's a white-collar criminal, and he's not a criminal at all, actually, but he's charged with white-collar crimes. Therefore, why must he be held under such conditions? Why can't he be held in a low security facility or even under house arrest or something like that with an electronic ankle tag? He's on remand, after all, for an indefinite period of time, I might say, which is also very disturbing to me. And, he hasn't actually been convicted of a crime in the UK. So I really don't understand why he must be held in a prison alongside murderers, violent criminals and terrorists.
A lot of people are concerned for his mental health, and there is a lot of uncertainty, isn't there, in terms of when he was to be extradited. The up and downs of all of that must really impact this whole journey as well.
Oh, most definitely. I know full well what it feels like to be held in a prison with no end date in sight, no knowledge of when or if you'll ever get out of there. It is psychological torture. And we know Julian Assange is suffering from a number of very severe mental health ailments. The entire reason his extradition was initially rejected by a lower court in the UK was on mental health grounds and fears that should he be sent to the US, which, by the way, has even more abhorrent prison conditions than the UK, he could be a real risk of suicide. He could be at real risk of suicide. And I think he's been put through enough. I'm actually really concerned about his mental health and obviously his physical health. It would have taken a huge toll on him physically as well. And again, I just don't see why we need to hold somebody who's accused of essentially political crimes under such conditions in a Western country. I think it's unacceptable.
If the extradition goes through, given the fact that this particular court in the US where the matter would be heard in, the US has a more than 90% prosecution rate, and he won't be able to argue what was in the public interest, would he get a fair trial?
I don't know. I can't make the call as to whether he would get a fair trial or not. Obviously, the US has a robust judicial system, presumption of innocence, separation of powers, rule of law, just like Australia and the UK have. And, we have to trust that he will get a fair trial. But on the other hand, this is a very inherently political case, and it's not a regular court case in the US or in the UK. Again, we need a political solution to this, I think. The decision by the US Department of Justice to pursue Julian Assange was made by the Trump administration. So this is years and years after the so-called crimes he's been accused of committing, actually occurred. The Obama administration made the decision not to request his extradition, but Trump's administration did. And I think that was a political decision. And I'm not quite sure why Joe Biden's administration, being opposed to Trump in so many other ways, has decided to carry on with Trump's line on this. I think we need a political solution for what has always been a political case. Regardless of the merits of, I'm sure Julian Assange has made mistakes. I'm sure WikiLeaks has published things or leaked information that, has been damaging to US national interests or whatever. But I do think that there is a very strong public interest case to be made that, for instance, leaking information pertaining to alleged war crimes committed during the war on terror in Iraq and Afghanistan was fundamentally in the public interest and did actually have a large and sizable impact on the ground in those countries, perhaps in ensuring such atrocities weren't committed again.
And Kylie, if he was to plead guilty, could he serve a minimum sentence in Australia, do you think?
That really depends, I guess, on any agreement that's come to between the US and Australia if he is found guilty, presuming he actually is extradited to the US. And we're not sure about that yet. As you know, there's another appeal in the works. There's also the potential to appeal to the EU Court of Human Rights. So, the European Court of Justice. So, therefore, it's unclear whether he will even, arrive in the US and then be convicted and found guilty. If so, I think it would be very late in the day for Australia to step in at that point. We really would hope that if he is extradited to the US, the Australian government at a very, very high level will make representations to resolve this diplomatically. But if worst case scenario, he is convicted. Obviously, it is better for Julian and his family to serve time in Australia than in a US prison, which we know, our US prison system is pretty horrific. And there are all sorts of very concerning laws and rules around indefinite solitary confinement and that kind of thing. Julian has family in Australia. Obviously, it's better to bring him back to Australia. He's one of our own citizens at the end of the day, and I believe our government has a responsibility to advocate for its citizens, protect its citizens, and look after its citizens' interests.
Well, Dr Kylie Moore Gilbert, really appreciate your time, your expertise, your opinions, and also sharing your personal story. Take care, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks so much, Janie.